All right, Kevin Little, we're back again. Okay, so last video we talked about three things that we learned from the Word about teaching the Word. Number one, God has to be the source of all our content. Number two, we communicate and the Holy Spirit illuminates. And number three, that we're going to teach according to the pattern of the world that we're in, because it's going to make the truth more acceptable. It's going to help them connect with it better. So let's talk about the pattern. Let's talk about how are we going to teach right now. What's the pattern that we're going to use? And so this time together is all about preparing the message. Now, the next one or two messages that we'll spend together is going to be about how do you deliver it? How do you communicate in such a way to keep the kids engaged? But this is all about preparation. And so the key to preparation is knowing the pattern and using the pattern to best structure your talk. Now, patterns are all around us. Patterns of communication are all around us. Like, for instance, if you've ever talked about conflict resolution at any time in your life, and as you all get older and move towards marriage, if you go through marriage counseling, you're going to learn a pattern that's going to help you overcome conflict. It's going to be this. When you do this, when you blank, whatever the action is, it makes me feel this. So, for instance, when you poot around me, it makes me feel like you don't honor me. I don't know. Whatever it is you want to fill those blanks in, with your friends or the people around you. But again, you don't make it personal. You don't make it you stink, because that's personal, and it's making it about them as opposed to making it about what they've done. But again, you see that it's all about the pattern. When you do blank, it makes me feel blank. If you've ever had a scout, boy or girl, show up at your door, then you've seen a pattern. They will introduce themselves and their cause. This is who I am. This is what I'm about. They will reveal what they are selling, and we are selling candy bars to help us in our cause. And then they will ask you to help them and their cause by buying what they're selling. So again, it's a pattern. They've been taught it. They learn it. It's a pattern that plugs in. If you grew up Baptist, I personally did not. I like the Baptists. I spent a lot of time with the Baptists, but they have at least when I was there, had a very clear pattern. They would have 3 points, typically brought together by alliteration. Funny story, when I joined Kid Life, our values were culture of family discipleship, community of volunteers, and character of the kids. You see it? C. 3 points brought together by alliteration. I mean, I'm not saying that Kid Life started out Baptist, but we have since chucked that and again tried to come up with phrases that help us partnering with parents. We know what that is. Culture of family discipleship, not really sure. But partnering with parents, we know what that is. Number two, community of leaders, because again, I don't like volunteers. I like leaders. Number three, inside-out transformation. Again, that it starts from the inside, what they believe, what they see, what they know, and then it flows out. It flows out into their lives. Inside-out transformation. Number three, that we're going to, no, that was number three. And then we added 4 and 5, fun and safety and security. So again, patterns help us. My favorite pattern, the pattern that has most influenced my teaching, whether it be for kids or for adults, is from a guy named Andy Stanley. And his pattern, the way that he structures his talk, he boils it down to a single main point. And so, man, we're going to be hammering that a lot, that, man, we don't want to overwhelm these kids with multiple main ideas. We want everything we say to be razor sharp focus. We want to be a sniper rifle and not a shotgun. A sniper rifle hits one target, but the chances of them hitting it are high. A shotgun, man, it splatters everywhere, and they might hit a lot of things, but not really make any impact on what they're hitting. So again, we want to be that sniper rifle. Andy Stanley talks about, man, 1 point talks. What's the main point? What's the point you were making? Nail it down, clarify it, communicate it well. What's the 1 point you're making? And then he structures his talk. At least this is how he described it in his book, Communicating to Change Lives. And this is always fun to say. Me, we, God, you, we. I mean, it really sounds like I'm introducing you to some sort of Indian princes. Hey, this is my friend, Miwi Gajiwi. But actually, it's 5 points that kind of break down how he structures his message. He talks about me. And so he always introduces his personal experience with the topic. It may be through a fun story, maybe through a serious story, whatever it is, but it always starts me, my experience with the topic. Then he talks about we, that he then incorporates his audience, trying to process through a little bit of the way they might be thinking of and experiencing the topic then. From there, he then transitions into the God portion of his sermon, where he really dives into the Word and explains what God says about the topic. From there, he transitions into more of the application part, helping folks understand how they're going to step into it, how they're going to walk in obedience to this topic, and that's the you part. You may need to do this, and you may do this, and you may do this. It's the you part, but then the we part is casting vision. And if we really grabbed hold of this, if we really followed through with what God said, what could be the possibilities? And that's the we part. So again, me, we, God, you, we. And no other pattern has impacted my teaching as much as that one. Because again, I connect, I help you connect, we talk about what God has to say, and then we put it into practice. And whenever we get to our pattern, the one that we use in Kid Life, you're going to see that is the pattern that we use. So let's get started. Let's get you some structure, because that's the power of the pattern, is it gives you some structure, so it helps you have clarity as you're putting a message together, that you know that you're on a path to a single main point. And it gives you some structure, so it gets you sped up. It helps you to write messages more quickly because you've got a structure that you're using. So let's do it. Now, a question came up that we were talking about last week, was just, where do I start? Well, the way you get started is either by a main point or by a Bible story. And so here's the deal. If you are just approached by, let's say, a school system, and they want you to come in and do chapel, that happens to me every once in a while. Well, then, if I have a choice and it's wide open, and it's just a one single time talk, I'm always going to start with the Bible story. And the reason for that is it's always going to help me handle the word better if I start from the scripture and then work from there. Anytime that we come up with a main point first and then try to find scripture that matches that, there's always an issue there. We're going to talk about how to do that, but it's always better, if we can, to start with the scriptures. Now, in Kid Life, we do thematic units. And so we start with a theme, and typically we're covering the same thing multiple times. Like, for instance, we're in Go right now, and Go is all about joining God in his mission, both locally around me, nearby, and also globally across the world. And so that's our theme, and we had some main points that were already picked for us. So again, that's when we start writing talks from main points. It's not necessarily bad, but that's one of the two places we're going to start. Either God is laying something on our heart that, man, we feel like we need to talk to the kids about honesty. We need to talk to the kids about worship. And so maybe it's a main point, maybe it's an idea and a concept that we want to start with. Or, again, if I have my choice, I'm always going to start with the Bible story, if it's a one-off. But when we use units, typically we're going to have to choose main points and then develop it from there. So let's talk about main points, okay? Let's talk about developing a main point. Because whether you have a Bible story or whether you have a concept, you then need to structure it into a main point. What's the difference between a concept and a main point? Well, a concept is, I want to talk about worship. Okay, worship is an idea. Worship is a concept. But what's the main point that I'm trying to communicate? Now, for me, I try to write my main points in one of two different ways. Either as I statements or as God statements. And here's why. Because in our structure, we're going to repeat this main idea over and over and over again. And so I want these kids either to be saying something about God and understanding more about who he is, or I want them to be saying something about themselves, and so that they understand who they are or how they should act. Does that make sense? And so that's the plan. So whenever it comes time to make a main point, we're going to take this concept and we're going to boil it down to a single point, either about them and what they should do or who they are, or about God and who he is and what he wants to do. This point, as we structure it, as we prepare it, it should take about 25% of your time. If you've got 3 hours to prepare, then you should spend 30 to 45 minutes really nailing down your main point. Because if you get your main point right, it travels with them. Andy Stanley, here's another Andy Stanleyism for you. He says, memorable is portable. So if I structure my main point well, and I get it simple, and I get it memorable, and I get it to where it travels with them, then all of a sudden they carry it with them. They know it. They own it. And the Holy Spirit can bring that to remembrance at any moment as they go through life. So here's a few pointers to think about as you're structuring your main point. So for instance, I've been working on the big screen series. There's one movie that we're going to use. I don't want to reveal to it what it is yet. There's one movie that we're going to use, but it's all about a person who has this dream for their life, and it's all about them. But then they decide that they find that life is better if they invest it in others. And so, I've been trying to write that main point today. So again, so put others first. Well, okay, so that's not really written as I or God as the subject, but it really is kind of what we're talking about. And so I just began pondering. Again, I want to get it as an I statement. And so, but I also want to use very simple words. So because the more simple the words, the more easy it is to know, but I want to make sure the words are right. So and then also I want to give it a rhythm, possibly a rhyme, but only if I can do it without costing clarity. I don't want to choose rhythm or rhyme over clear words, over clear, simple words. It just so happened that as we were writing this, we got to a place where I think we have clarity, I think we have rhythm, and we happen to have rhyme. Now, I'm willing to sacrifice either of those last two for the sake of clarity. But if I happen to be able to word it and get it to where it all kind of comes together, it's great. So here's what we came up with. To truly live, I must give. To truly live, I must give. And so if I want to truly live the life that God has for me, I have to give to others. That's when my life becomes everything it's meant to be. To truly live, I must give. So again, simple words. Rhythm and rhyme are helpful as long as it doesn't steamroll the message. And again, we're going to use I or God as the subject because, again, it clarifies what we're saying. I'm either saying something about me, what I need to do, who I am, or I'm saying something about God and who He is. So there you go. That's how we're going to structure our main point. And we're going to take our time on that, really clarifying the main point. Next thing we want to talk about is choosing a story. Now, last week we talked about how do you read a story for all it's worth, and one of the things we talked about was discerning the main point, discerning the main principle in a story, as opposed to discerning the secondary principles. Like in the context of the audience it was written, what was the main principle that the author was trying to communicate by sharing this story? What was the main point of the story as it is written? If at all possible, I want to choose a story whose main principle, whose principal bridge that takes me from their time to my time, is the main point for this that I need to communicate to the kids. So again, I want to choose the story well. Now, for us, Zacchaeus made sense. But unfortunately, this summer we've already communicated about Zacchaeus twice, and so we're back to the drawing board looking for the right story to communicate. And again, something that's the main principle. If I can't find a story where the main principle is the same as my main point, then I'll look for one that has a secondary principle, that it's in there and it's communicated, but maybe it's not the main point of the story, and I'll use it to communicate that. But again, only if necessary. I want to make sure that my story matches my main point. So again, once we've got my main point, once I've got my story, those are the two chief elements of our talk. We've got to have those, and we want to spend as much time as we need to really get the right story and get the right main point, structured the right way, said the right way so it's memorable, so it goes with them. After that, we're ready to add our structure around the Bible story. So here's our structure. Here are kind of the slots that we're going to fill in so that we can make our Bible story and do it relatively quickly. I know my main point. I know my Bible story. The first thing I want to come up with is a personal story about the topic. Again, Andy Stanley says me. I want to talk about me. So think about when you were their age, and what is a story from your life that connects with them? If you can't come up with something from when you were their age, then come up with something now. So again, when we talk about to live, I must give. So for me, when was a time that I either experienced the joy of giving, or when was it that I had a very selfish bent to my life? And I want to come up with a personal story. It helps if it's a funny story, and it's twice as good if it's a funny story involving something that the kids are very familiar with. So for instance, talking about a time I made it all about me when I was playing a video game, especially if it's a video game that they know and love. They will connect with it, they'll know it, but they'll also understand what I'm talking about because they felt the same thing. They may be feeling to themselves there's nothing wrong with yelling at someone because they killed you in a video game, but that is all about me. To live, I must give. So it's a great way to kind of introduce this topic of how do I live my life to give? Because all I know is that I'm living my life for me, and I need to change that. So again, as we structure it, I'm going to tell a personal story about me. And as we talk about delivery, I'm going to tell you some ideas about how you share a story in a way that really keeps them engaged. So then the next thing I need to understand is, what about you? So I've told my story, and then it's, as Andy calls it, the we part, where I want to draw them in. So what about you guys? Man, when's a time that you have made it all about you? And then help them think through times. Maybe it's for, like me, playing video games. Maybe it's playing sports. Maybe it's your stuff. But again, I'm gonna slowly help them think through so I get everybody on board. Now, not too slowly. I mean, it's going to take 2 minutes, 3 minutes at the most. But I'm just going to help pull them in by giving them examples from their life where they're experiencing the topic that we're talking about today. From there, again, we're still working on the story, but I've told this story with Zacchaeus, so I'm going to use that as an example. I just make a transition statement. And I say, man, there's a story in the Bible, in the book of Luke, where Jesus encounters a guy who made it all about himself. And then I start telling the story. So again, I've connected myself to the story, to the topic. I've brought them into the topic. And then I say, and then God gave us this story that's also about the topic. And then I start telling the story. Finally, after I tell the story and communicate the truth that God had for us in it, then I talk about application. Okay, so, man, for Zacchaeus it looked like this, but what does it look like for us? To put others above ourselves, to give to others rather than to make it all about us. Maybe it looks like this, or maybe as you're going through life it's going to look like this. I give a couple of specific examples of ways that they can live it out. So again, that's our structure. 4 parts to the structure, and all you're going to do is fill each slot as you're preparing your message. So you're going to tell a personal story about you and your experience with the topic. Then you're going to have a couple of examples that will draw them in, that will help them to see that they're in experience with this topic. Then I'm going to tell the Bible story that further explains the topic, and then I'm going to give them a few ways that they can apply it. That's my structure. If I can fill in each of those slots and then transition well between them, then oh my goodness, I've just nailed it. I mean, I have just figured out my Bible story. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to shut it off and turn it back on, and we'll start from here. All right, and we're back. We just finished talking about the structure. So now, again, I'm just going to fill in those slots. My story, examples that draw them in, the Bible story, and then ways that they can apply it. So when I'm writing a story, because that's the thing is we can't just write Bible story and then tell the story. Here are some things that I'm looking for. I'm going to read through the story. I'm going to find the high points of the plot. I don't have to hit everything, because if I do, it might drag and it might get a little boring. So what are the high points of the plots? The 3 or 4 essential turns in the story. So with Zacchaeus, it would be understanding that he was a tax collector and what that meant. It would be Jesus showing up. and him trying to see it. And then it would be the transformation that happens to Zacchaeus when Jesus comes to his house. So again, those are the 3 high points that I have to hit. The next thing that I have to do is I have to figure out what the important details are. Because again, a good story has just enough detail. Tell it too slim, and it's never really an engaging story. Tell it too thick, where you're trying to include every detail, and you miss it. You miss them. And so when I tell a story, I want to have just enough detail. So again, high point of the story, who Zacchaeus is. Well, I want to communicate that he was short, because that's going to be important later in the story, and that he was a tax collector, and what that meant. That it meant that he had to collect a certain amount for the government, but he could charge whatever he wanted to. I also have to communicate that if you didn't pay him, you would go to jail. And then the final detail is, how do you think people felt about Zacchaeus? Well, they didn't like it. Okay, so that helps me catch and understand who Zacchaeus was. In the second part, that Jesus came. Well, first, he heard the rumor that Jesus was coming. Second, nobody told him when Jesus arrived because nobody liked him. And then number 3, he had to climb up into a tree, and by the time he got up to the tree, Jesus was gone. But he wasn't gone. He was just underneath him, and he invited Zacchaeus to eat with him. Actually, he invited himself over to Zacchaeus' house to eat with him. And then from there, the last part of the story, the last high point, is the transformation. And the detail there is just that we don't know what was said between them, but we do know the result, and that was that Zacchaeus said that he would repay, that he would give half his money to the poor, that's it, and that he would repay those he had robbed 4 times what he gave them. So again, just enough detail to really help them understand the story, to make it intriguing, but not enough to make it drag. So again, as you do this more and more, you'll begin to understand, there wasn't enough detail, it didn't really tell the story, or, oh man, I had too much detail, and it drug, it was just slow. The next thing is, you're going to connect to the important emotions and then decide how to connect your audience to them. So again, I wanted them to know that Zacchaeus was very sad, that even though he had a lot of money and that he made life all about him, that he was very sad. And so the way that I wanted to do that was to talk about if these people would like Zacchaeus, and they certainly would not. And then they knew that Zacchaeus would be sad because he didn't have any friends. So again, I want them to connect to some of the core and chief emotions in the story. So again, and then I'm going to write it in such a way to communicate that. The high points of the plot, but just enough detail to keep it moving, and then I want them to really connect with some of the important feelings, and I got to figure out how I'm going to do that. Okay? So again, our structure is simple. Personal story, Bible story, personal story, some examples, some questions that draw them into the topic, and then the Bible story about the topic, and then some ways that they can put it into practice. Now, here's the question about kid life. If you ever do the Bible story in kid life, you're going to be handed a talk. Your kid life pastor will send you at least a rough outline of what it is that you're supposed to teach. There'll be a lesson intro in it that's maybe kind of an illustration or something that happens at the very beginning of the service that you're going to do that kind of piques the interest of the kids. And then you're going to be handed the Bible story. And typically, the chief plot elements are going to be a part of that, but you're going to have to flesh it out some. And so here's what you're going to have to do when you've been handed that sermon to prepare for your teaching time in kid life. You're going to have to come up with a personal story. Okay? You're going to have to think about the topic, think about your life, and come up with a personal story that connects with you, that connects with the topic, and that connects with the kids. You're also, you're going to have to think through the questions to draw them in. Because chances are those may, but probably not have been included. Questions that pull them in, that help them understand how they connect to the topic. And then you're really going to have to decide for yourself how much is enough detail and what feelings you want to communicate about the Bible story. And then what are the applications. So again, you take that, you make sure that the structure is clear. Personal story, draw them in, tell the Bible story, how can they apply it? And then you're out and you're gone. But you got to make it yours. And so you didn't choose the story, you didn't choose the main point. But man, you just need to study that story and ask God first to teach you about the main point, decide any application that you need to make from the story about the main point. And then you're able to step forward and teach it. Okay? Hope this was helpful. Look forward to talking to you about it this weekend and putting it into practice as you guys prepare your messages and deliver them for your fellow interns. So we will see you then.